Thank you. I call the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Talofa lava, Mr Speaker. May I join with the previous member in welcoming Samoan Language Week this week. Mr Speaker, National MPs must think New Zealanders are stupid because they stand up and describe that they're allocating new money to this or that program and assume that Kiwis don't understand that that is less than the cost of inflation to those votes and less than, by a considerable margin, the previous Labour government gave to those votes. So take health, budgeted an additional roughly $500 million in this year's budget, used to get between $700 and $800 million under Labour. Or education, used to get $400 to $500 million under Labour, got around half that this year, and that's before one takes out the additional KiwiSaver costs which are being taken out from within government baselines. In fact, Mr Speaker, this is a sub-zero budget, as Phil Goff said, because it's not a zero balance. They take out about $1.5 billion from frontline public services that New Zealanders need. So let's have no more of those comments from the other side. Mr Speaker, Labour has no confidence in this sub-zero budget because it hurts and does not help New Zealand, because it is full of rosy growth projections and rubber numbers, and because it leaves unaddressed the key, the most crucial structural questions needed to turn this country's economy around. Mr Speaker, it may surprise some New Zealanders to hear the Labour opposition say, we agree that debt is too high and that it must come down, but that what matters to New Zealanders is that that change is managed in a sensible and balanced way so that we can get New Zealanders back to work and grow our savings and take care of the most vulnerable at the same time, as we are reducing net debt over the medium term. Mr Speaker, it's becoming increasingly clear in this most crucial of all election years that it is to the Labour opposition that New Zealanders will have to turn for leadership on those questions. Mr Speaker, today I'm going to cover three key issues around this budget. Firstly, what is the nature of the problem it's trying to solve for our country? Secondly, what does it propose to do and what results does it project? And thirdly, what would Labour do if we were on the Treasury benches in broad terms this year? Mr Speaker, to the first of those, what is the budget trying to achieve? Well, to take the government at its word, its overriding priority is to move the economy out of debt by running a government surplus, which they say they can do a year earlier. But, Mr Speaker, that ignores some of the other hugely important symptoms that reflect the disease in our economy. Firstly, unemployment is 6.5%. That is high by New Zealand standards, and it's nearly double the 3.5% under Labour. Worse still, sir, 271,000 New Zealanders say they are jobless, many of whom have not even registered for unemployment. Mr Speaker, prices are rising faster than wages, and New Zealand families are paying the price. Wage growth was 1.9% in the last year, compared to inflation of 4.5%, food price inflation of 5.1%, and petrol and fuel costs up over 10%. So, Mr Speaker, New Zealanders aren't stupid. They feel worse off because they are worse off. The difference between those numbers is a real terms cut in every New Zealander's standard of living. And behind the numbers, sir, are poignant stories that have been made available to members of the opposition, like the pensioner who can't afford milk in her tea and saves a little bit for special occasions when she has visitors. Or the family with 3 boys, the youngest of whom is calcium deficient, who tells me that they can't afford to buy milk at the supermarket. Or the pensioners huddled in blankets in damp, cold flats because they cannot afford to heat them, with the price of power rising as fast as it does. Or the babies and children suffering respiratory disease because the mould is growing up the walls in the state houses that this government has cut the budget for retrofitting. Mr Speaker, the government will tell you that they have no choice but to cut government spending, but Mr Speaker, they've made choices. They made a choice to give $23 billion of tax cuts in the last two budgets and run a $16 billion deficit now. Those were real choices to give major tax cuts to New Zealanders who could least need them while those other Kiwis are suffering. Mr. Speaker, Labour believes it has a credible and balanced plan to get debt down while getting New Zealanders back to work and getting our savings rate up. But what does the budget propose and how's it going? Well, Mr. Speaker, the budget numbers are not credible. The $380 million borrowing requirement that the Treasurer trumpets has been proven to be self-inflated because Treasury documents show that $5 billion, $100 million a week, they are choosing to borrow extra because they say perhaps they're getting a better deal, or was it simply to frighten New Zealanders that radical surgery was required by pumping up the numbers this year and taking them down again before the election? Mr. Speaker, the rosy growth forecasts in the budgets are just so incredible that they've convinced nobody, particularly not Standard & Poor's, who've refused to take New Zealand off negative credit watch. Mr. Speaker, commentators believe the wage growth projections are rubbish when KiwiSaver cuts are taken out. They note that Treasury and IRD's revenue forecasts are nearly $1 billion a year apart. $3.8 billion over 4 years, and the government booked the higher number. They note the $1 billion in unspecified cuts, Mr. Speaker, $1 billion and no clue to the public of where it's going to come from. And there's only two possibilities. Either the government doesn't know because they haven't figured it out, or they do know and they're not being frank and honest with New Zealanders, because they don't want them to know what services are being cut before they have the chance to vote on it. Mr. Speaker, all that pain, all those cuts to health, cuts to education, cuts to KiwiSaver. Mr. Speaker, $10 a week off the member tax credit, another $3 or $4 a week lost from higher employer taxes being passed through to the employee. Mr. Speaker, the loss of every New Zealander's birthright and the selling of our assets. Mr. Speaker, the cuts to working for families that affect over 50% of all families receiving WFF payments and cost a family of $80,000, $50 a week by 2015. Mr. Speaker, all that pain and what gain? Well, Mr. Speaker, let's judge that question by looking at the Treasury's own number. Does the budget build savings? Mr. Speaker, it may have broken the promise and cut KiwiSaver by 1 July this year, but extraordinarily, net international debt, the sum total of the country's savings, goes up. Mr. Speaker, it goes up. Mr. Speaker, let's get the numbers right, from 78% to 85%. By 2015. Does the budget build a stronger export-oriented economy? No, Mr. Speaker. Nobody believes the 177,000 new jobs the Pixies are going to create in the bottom of the garden. In fact, the budget documents show the current account deficit, Mr. Speaker, blows out again. Let's get it right. From 4% in 2012 to 7% in 2015. No more savings, no more exports, no more jobs, no solution to the country's ills. The budget hurts, but it doesn't help, Mr. Speaker. What would help look like? What would a good budget do, Mr. Speaker? Labour has a credible, balanced plan to turn this economy around. It will be fully costed and it will stand on 4 pillars. Build a strong export economy using economic development, using innovation, skills and changing monetary policy to lower the outrageously high exchange rate. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, increase savings and productive investment. Don't sell our assets. Don't sell our land. We will only owe more to foreigners when we pay the rent in future. Own our own future, Mr. Speaker. That's what Labour will help New Zealand do. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, help all New Zealanders get ahead by addressing the cost of living. Take the GST off fruit and vegetables. Make the first $100 a week tax-free. Lift the minimum wage to $15 an hour and pay for it with a credible tax plan that will leave the incentives for productivity stronger, not weaker. And Mr. Speaker, reduce debt as fast as the government over a 10 to 15-year period. Mr. Speaker, all of that can be done within a credible and balanced plan, and that is the opposite of what's being offered by this government in a budget that hurts but does not help.
Good speech. Good speech.